Welcome to the Backyard Professor Responds videos. I have just finished the Orion Zone, Ancient Star Cities of the American Southwest. I have also now received Gary David's second book, The Mirrors of Orion, The Knowledge of the Ancient World, which I am now currently pursuing and reading. But I do want to review this book just a little bit because of its real interesting connection with UFOs. The Hopis have been around they're descended from earlier peoples, of course, the Anasazi, etc. And they go back to about 1000 AD. So we're looking at a millennium of time. Their religious and mythological and historical understanding is that they have been guided by the Kachinas, who are the star people. And in their ceremonies, in their kivas, the kiva is either a little round, a round room, or most of them are rectangular now. And there's a hole in the center called the Sipapuni, which is the place of emergence from the previous third world. They emerged here in the fourth world. The Grand Sipapuni in their mythology is the Grand Canyon, and they have built up their land, settled in their land through their migrations, which the main star person, deity, Masau. Now I'm going to pronounce him Masau. I think it's Masau or Masau. There are variant spellings. Maasaw is how I'm going to pronounce him, Masau, who was the main Kachina who helped them emerge from the third world, and then he guided them on their migrations. Now, I was not aware of the political tension, the fallout, the arguments with Waters and with other various Hopi authors. I have the Book of the Hopi by Frank Waters and other books. And they have put an enormous amount of bias into their books, apparently. Some of the Hopis don't like them. Some of them said they denigrated their ceremonies, perhaps. Probably wasn't his intent, but being an outsider, he did. Gary David's text is the singular most complete analysis of the Hopi, from an outsider, of the Hopi mythology and history and ethnology, etc. It is tremendous. It has everything I ever wanted in a book, and now he's extended it to the Mirrors of Orion, which is turning out to be very, very good too. I can only pick and choose some highlights for this time. I will try to make a series of videos because this absolutely has to do with the idea that the UFOs have been contacting humans off and on through all time. And the Hopis are one of the very most remarkable witnesses to that fact as an entire culture. And it comes through their Kachina dolls, through their Kachinas, I should say, intermediary beings, Masau being the main one. And so I will just pick and choose. The interesting thing about the underworld, which is where mythologically this is where they came from, which they identify with the third world. However, this fourth world is above the underworld, Kuzkurza. Its symbolic mineral is copper. Its direction is southeast. Directions and colors, and its color is red. Direction, colors, metals, and the stars were absolutely critical to the Hopi, the entire overarching Hopi spiritual scheme. Very alchemical, very remarkable, very, very artistic, deeply cosmological, because they didn't have television in 1000 AD. Their television was the heavens, the sky. They didn't have light pollution. And so they understood the skies in utterly astonishing ways. Very interesting how this works. This was a time when great cities and trade routes were built and civilization was vibrant and burgeoning. The people invented many machines and conveniences of high technology, some of which have not yet been seen in this age. They even had spiritual powers that they used for good. So David notes this startling description that reverberates with echoes of Atlantis or Mu is corroborated by legends of the Patuvota, that is the flying shield of Masau, the main Kachina, who for all intents and purposes from the Hopi's cultural outlook was the great creator, more or less. And he says that later on in the book. But for now, we'll deal with him as what very similar to the role that the great angel of Yahweh played in the Old Testament. And we are aware of studies from Margaret Barker and others who have identified that great angel, which visited many, many, many of the ancient Hebrew prophets through their long history. That essentially was Yahweh. But he was identified as a great angel. Pretty much the same theme with Masau. He was a great angel. He was a guide. He was a helper. And what is so remarkable that he did, here's a description. It was still daylight in the evening when they decided to make camp. The fleeing parents on a journey to Arizona, and a brother and a sister were left behind. And so it was still daylight in the evening when they decided to make camp, just about opening their bundle of lunch when they heard a loud roaring noise overhead, and they were very much frightened and wondered what it could be. Tiwahongva, the brother, held his sister tightly to his breast, and behold, someone had descended from the heavens, and he was clothed in a glittering costume of ice that sparkled like silver, and his head and face shone like a star. He spoke to them and he said, "Do not fear." Now, and this is so reminiscent of so many accounts, especially in the ancient Hebrew materials. When an angel comes, it just terrifies people spitless. And the angel has to say, "Don't fear, never fear, stay calm." I mean, when Jesus's birth was announced in the temple in the New Testament, in the opening of the New Testament, that angel had to say, Gabriel, I believe, he had to tell Joseph and Mary, "Do not fear, hold on, stay calm." So we get the same thing here. I am Sotukeo Nangui, the heavenly God, and because of the sympathy I have for you, and I have come to help you, so come, get on this shield. And the word here is Yovota. Come and get on this shield, and let us be on our way. So he then took them on his flying shield up into the sky so that they could see for many miles around. He fed the hungry children ripe melons and described the type of faith and trust that they must place in him and in his teachings, which would come in the form of dreams as the children got older. He then set them down a short distance from the village in which then their parents had settled. He bid them farewell and ascended into the heavens. Now, this is the being called Sotuknang. And the brother and sister, forever grateful, walked into the village to be reunited with their parents. Because the Hopi had no such thing as a saucer, they named it after the cultural accoutrement which most closely approximates that shape. In other words, the warrior shield. The flying shield appears in more than one myth, and petroglyphs also evidence this tradition also exists. On Second Mesa near Mishingovi, an ancient petroglyph depicts a dome-shaped object resting on an arrow, which represents travel through space, and the head of a Hopi maiden who represents pristine purity. As the Hopis believe that other planets are inhabited, this petroglyph represents what they call a patuvota, or a flying shield similar to a flying saucer. And This came here in the beginning, so now at the end, these sacred ones will arrive from another planet, said to be Venus in some accounts, and they will arrive by flying saucers. Many Hopi traditionalists recently have reported seeing flying saucers, all piloted by beings that the Hopis call the Kachinas or the Katsinam. That is their star people. It must be noted that the previously mentioned worlds were spatially conceptualized as being positioned one on top of the other like houses. So a progression from one world to the next would signal a gradual ascent up in from the lower darkness up into the light. They began in the first world, which was not a material world. Then they ascended to a second world, then the third world, and now we are here in the fourth world. And there's only one more world after this one. But they arrived here, and they have been helped along by the sky people, whom they call the Kachinas. Now, that is fascinating. I think that is so remarkably interesting. And in the entire pantheon of Hopi mythological figures, none is more important than the god Masau. And Masau is both a real person and a manifestation of the creator. And the apparently essential element, his name is derived from the Hopi word Masi, which means gray. In fact, the description in Hopi mythology of this being is uncomfortably close to contemporary images of the race of extraterrestrial grays, and he shows a picture. Now that looks like an alien gray. That is Masau. And what is very interesting in the Masa, the word, means wing or feather, thereby emphasizing his ability of flight. Masau also sometimes hermaphroditically wears a tattered woman's dress fastened under the right armpit instead of the customary left. For the Hopi, the left is the sacred side. This exemplifies his nature as a contrary or as a trickster, figure similar to the Lakota Sioux, Heyoka. They always have these trickster deities. He dresses and acts the opposite of human expectations and customs. So halfway to the middle of the mesa, they met him, Masau, and the sight was so gruesome as to make the eyes strain from the sockets. He's a terrifying, gruesome, gross deity. Had not their hearts been so staunch, they would have turned back. Oh, it's talking about a couple of twins and their adventures in meeting Masau. And he was hideous beyond words. Raw flesh and clots of blood hung all over his body, and his great head was ugly and glaring. In this account, the cultural hero Tayo does something utterly fascinating. He challenges Masau to a wrestling match. Now, this reminds us of Jacob in the Old Testament, without question. Jacob's ladder. Jacob sees this ladder, and he sees the angels running up and down this ladder, and he has a vision of heaven. He has his own ascent, is what happens. The text doesn't say that, but that is the full intent of the text. At the end, a great angel comes, a being, and he wrestles with him all night. Now, he dislocates Jacob's hip, but Jacob prevailed, and because of that, the being changed his name. He said, no longer are you going to be called Jacob. I'm going to call you Israel. And Jacob wanted the being's name, and he said, nope, I'm not going to give you my name. But Jacob prevailed, and because he wrestled and prevailed, he received the blessing. This is really an interesting parallel. Where did the Hopis get this idea? Now, this account is somewhat different, a little bit. He challenges him to a wrestling match, and he overcomes him. After which Masau takes off his terrifying mask and he is then revealed as a very handsome youth. So you see, the mask is to scare away those who are not prepared for the real revelation of the glory of the deity. Tayo, the hero, dared challenge the dragon. St. George and the dragon, same principle from medieval times. The dragon is absolutely hideous, but he is the guardian of the greatest treasure. So was Masau. Very interesting. He sits down, he graciously smokes a pipe with Tayo while explaining the extent of his dominion. On the other hand, in his trickster capacity, he is sometimes a thief and a liar, a buffoon, and a practical joker. That is part of the role of a trickster deity. He is also conceptualized as the god of death and the ruler of the underworld. The god himself can be introduced as a mythological figure whose primary focus rests in his lively relationship with the realm of death. He is a death spirit, corpse, demon, mummified corpse are all phrases formerly used in reference to this dark god. As guardians of the underworld, members of the elite Kwan, that is the one horn society in the Hopi group, claim to serve Masau. Akin to the Greek god Hermes or the Norse god Odin, he is sometimes known as a psychopomp. Now, this is interesting. It is not death and the underworld, the dark, the dreary, etc., is not itself an evil. And there is a guide, a psychopomp, just like Hermes, so Masau, traveling between the worlds, between our world and the underworld. And this is exactly understood in the same way with the ancient Egyptians. Shamanic Wisdom of the Pyramid Text, Jeremy Nadler. I'll just read a quick footnote real quick. In the pyramid texts, Utterance 216, paragraph 151, identifies, interestingly enough, directly in correlation with the subject we're talking on, the Orion connection here with the Hopis. The Egyptians also identified the constellation Orion with what they called the Duat, their version of the underworld. And it's usually interpreted as referring to the fading of the southern stars at dawn. As the stars rise heliactically, and then Orion goes down, he dies. From there, they knew he was under the earth in the underworld, and he would come back. This is the exact same information about Masau. Very interesting. The context at the beginning of the utterance is being that of the sun's descent in the night boat. That is why the sun is an eternal being. Yes, it dies in the ocean, but it also resurrects in the ocean in the east. This is why Osiris, who was associated with Orion, is also the god of the underworld as well as the god of resurrection, because both of these cultures, the Egyptian and the Hopi, were looking at the constellation Orion and realizing their spirituality rests with this heavenly revelation, and they literally incorporated it into their own landscape with the help of the guardian deity. Astoundingly, in Egypt also, the three great pyramids at Cairo in Giza align with the belt stars of Orion. We also have that with the three mesas of the Hopi, which also align with the three stars of the belt of Orion, but the Hopi go further. So anyway, this is a very, very interesting connection of the descent of the sun god into the underworld, and the king himself sails with Orion in the Duat through the night. And the cosmology of the pyramid texts, he says, the Akhet is the place in which the king, like the sun and other celestial beings, undergoes the final transformation from the inertness of death and night to the form that allows him to live effectively as an Ak, AKH, in eternity. He lives forever because he comes back above the horizon. Same exact principle as here in the Hopi. Utterly fascinating how that works. Now I'll skip and share a couple more ideas. What they did, and I think I showed this to you, what they did essentially, let me find the picture. As they migrated through the land, they were told by Masau they would be guided. Some went one direction, some groups went another. Anciently, some went a different direction, some went entirely different directions. And Masau said, I will be there and guide you and protect you. And when you see a bright star in the sky, that's where you stop and settle. And in the process of doing that over the centuries, I'll show it to you from this book. What they did is, on the one side is the constellation of Orion. On the other side is where the different villages are that are an exact earthly counterpart to every single star in Orion. And it is breathtaking how impressive this is. Nothing is left out. That's why he calls this the Orion Zone. The constellation of Orion is literally built right into the earth through the locations of their various villages. And the three belt stars, Mintaka, Al-Milam, and Alnatak, are the three mesas in the land. Absolutely phenomenal. So the idea in this series of villages, we have 11 both major and minor Anasazi or Singagua ruins and one Hopi Pueblo, perfectly aligned over a distance of over 275 miles within the framework of the Tellurian or the earthly Orion. The probability that these were randomly distributed is highly unlikely and increases the possibility that Masau or some other agent perceived as being divine directed their positioning. The UFOs helped them settle in villages that would represent all of the stars of the constellation of Orion. And we found the same thing in ancient Egypt. And this book is about showing that this same interesting arrangement happens elsewhere in North America, South America, across the ocean, in India, etc. And I'm really excited to see what he finds with all of the other various cultures, some down in Africa, etc. So in other words, what we do here is gazing from the central star of the earthbound belt of Orion towards its head, which is located in the foothills of the San Francisco peaks, where the Kachina live, the Kachina live. They live in the San Francisco peaks. We would see the celestial constellation precisely mirror the angle of the terrestrial constellation. They laid it out on the ground absolutely perfectly, more or less. Absolutely phenomenal how he describes all of this, and he has put a boatload of work. He describes the degrees, the minutes, the seconds, the direction, everything. He's got the full inclusion, lots of maps and charts and details. It's a sensational book, a good read. The subterranean realm of ancestral spirits is putatively an exact replica of the Pueblo world of physical beings, except it's in reverse. And this is their cosmological, spiritual aspect of their view of reality, it does bring in the three zones that we understand from the classical world over across the ocean in the old world. The heavens, the earth is the middle part, and the underworld. Very interesting. The upper and lower worlds were mirror images of each other, because this explains as well now that we understand this connection with the sky, with the cosmological aspect of this, we now understand that the harvests obtained in the underworld, good or bad, would be duplicated in this world during the fall months. This is exactly how the Jewish people did it in the Old Testament, aligning their temple to the right directions. Similarly, while the Hopi were celebrating the summer solstice with a relatively meager ceremony, the elaborate winter solstice rituals were underway in the underworld. And while Soyal, the Hopi winter solstice festival, was in full swing, the denizens of the underworld were holding the celebration of the summer. So the upper and lower worlds were mirror images of each other. That is a remarkable cosmology. So when the Anasazi gazed into the heavens, they were not looking at the extension of the physical world as we perceive it today, but were witnessing a manifestation of the spirit world. Much like the Egyptian Duat, the Hopi underworld encompasses the skies as well as the region beneath the surface of the earth. This is apparent in the dichotomous existence of ancestral spirits who live in the subterranean realm, but they periodically do return to the earthly villages as clouds. And what they're doing is they're bringing the treasures of heaven, the rain in that horribly dry desert Southwest. So this inversion is completely consistent with Hopi cosmology because the terrestrial configuration is seen as a reversal of the spirit world, of which the sky is another dimension. So Masau and the other Kachina beings who are also coming from the stars to help the Hopis perform their rituals in the spring and in the fall, in the summer and in the winter, etc., they are the spirits. They are the helpers. They are the deity involved in keeping balance of the entire world. And that was necessary through their rituals and ceremonies in their kiva, which they did several times a year. So they're other dimension beings. The UFO aliens are other dimensional beings from the Hopi's point of view. Another explanation for the change of directions is the possibility that the pole shift, which destroyed the Hopi's second world, reversed the position of the constellation in its mundane manifestation. And they took that into account. Now, they were really quite sophisticated astronomers. Very interesting. The Hisatsunom Anasazi form a geodetic configuration intentionally constructed to mirror the primary stars of the constellation of Orion. That is pretty solid after this book and this other book. Now, even if we acknowledge the impressive ability of the Anasazi to track the sun and stars across the sky, the question remains moot as to whether or not they were totally aware that their villages were the terrestrial reflection of the stars, because ultimately the schema was ordained by Masau. And it did very well. So perhaps, and this is my speculation, perhaps Masau would go in his flying shield, land, take some of the Hopis up in the sky with him and show them See over there, that's the direction you're going. Go toward that particular canyon or river or mesa, etc. Or you guys go here or whatever. And then he would drop them back down. But he guided their migrations, which ended up depicting the heavenly Orion constellation. And there are very powerful reasons why this was so, as I will get to. Over a period of almost 2.5 centuries, a terrestrial analog to Orion took shape in the high deserts of Arizona. It took about 200 years for them to get all of their migrations and wanderings and villages built that formed the constellation of Orion on the Arizona desert. Very interesting. And I'll skip that. Betelgeuse was a very prominent reddish star, while the white star Rigel was also very important to them. The presence of the gods inherent in complementary worlds of earth and sky is making itself known to the faithful who offer prayer feathers and cornmeal in order to perpetuate this sacred cycle, because they understood time as cyclical, not linear. That is why it was so important to keep repeating if you see a circle, the top part might be a solstice. You have a ceremony, then you have a ceremony through a quarter of the year, then another ceremony at halfway, then another ceremony. Then you keep repeating the same ceremonies, because if you could tie into the eternal cycle, which connects the heaven, the earth, and the underworld, all of which we will inhabit in our living journey. We all live, we'll all die, we will all be resurrected, and that is for eternity. That's why the same rituals, in the same manner, repeating it over and over again, kept the balance of the earth with the cosmos. This is a very vital part of the Hopi spirituality. And the heavenly beings, the Kachinas, would visit with them and participate with them in their ritual ceremonies, which was quite remarkable. So this mythological connection to the sun, they also tie in with the sun, finds an astronomical interpretation in the heliacal rising of the constellation. Orion's communion with the sun at the beginning of the summer follows his absence from the night sky, or his blindness in the summer, and he gets to see again in the winter when he arises above the underworld. Right now, Orion is very high in the southern sky. You can go look at him right now in February. Very interesting. The death of Orion also had astronomical ramifications. The scorpion was sent by Merope to bite him. And as Orion sets in the next couple of months, Scorpio will follow in the southern sky, and you'll be able to see Scorpio arise up, and he lays flat out. You can see the full constellation. It's one of the most grand constellations there is out there. So we will see him later on in perhaps April or May. So Orion was known as the biblical Nimrod. He was a mighty hunter, a warrior, a hero. He was even considered one of the giants in mythology, very interestingly, in the ancient world. And that is through very many different cultures besides the Hopi as well. Masau was considered to be the living embodiment Orion. And that is why that constellation was so important, because it kept their eye on their maker. So that is why Orion was so important. And as Robert Temple said in his Serious Mystery, some Hopi clans claim that they are originally from Sirius, that they were brought here from the star Sirius, which is always associated in all of the ancient cultures with the dog and the hunter. So that is worldwide. It is so astonishing. And there are some cultures who have a little bit of a difference. One of the Native Americans, instead of calling him a mighty hunter with his faithful dog, I believe one of the Native American tribes saw it as a great buffalo. And I think the belt stars were the backbone of the great buffalo. And then Sirius was part of that constellation. And it actually went all the way through about 3 different constellations. So there are some differences because the constellations themselves are from our perspective, right, here on Earth. So it's very interesting how this all tied in. And I am skipping enormous amounts of details. This book is chock full of all kinds of linguistic connections between the cultures concerning Orion that is just absolutely breathtaking. I don't have time right now. Maybe I'll do another video and share a lot of the linguistic materials, but it is very interesting. Oh, and I wanted to share this with you because I discovered this years ago when I read Ananda K. Kumaraswamy, The Door in the Sky. A very brilliant. Now, it's very interesting that Gary David does not utilize Kumaraswamy. But Kumaraswamy, and also in his book, another book, the article, I had to photocopy it because I couldn't get the book, Symbolism, The Clashing Rocks. Kumaraswamy is probably not the easiest author to find, but if you can find him, he is well worth getting as well. Incredible, astonishing Indian philosopher and artist and mythologist. He was one of the truly greats. He lived at the turn of the last century in the early 1900s. I'm not quite sure when he died, but Joseph Campbell knew him. And Joseph Campbell and Mircea Eliade and Kumaraswamy were 3 of the greatest world culture mythologists. Kumaraswamy focused more in the Vedic traditions of India and China, and his connections here are incredible. But his information from India is exactly similar to what I'm about to read you now from the Hopis here in the ancient desert southwest of America, which is quite remarkable. And it is a cosmological image, and it is based on the relationship between the earth and the sun and the moon, because that was their celestial clock, which gave them their cyclical aspect of time, because the moon, nonstop steady, goes through its phases every 28 days, no matter what. Just like the earth does, all 4 seasons, every year. And that's the pattern. So what happened was, in relationship to the Milky Way in the sky and how it worked in conjunction, the celestial path, and this is in the Mayan, it's in the Incan, it is in the Aztec, it is in the Hopi, it is in the Egyptian, it is in the Indian Vedic tradition, it is in the Norse, it is in Africa, it is absolutely everywhere, and yet we moderns just are not quite aware of this. And this is quite remarkable. This is their, I would call it their cosmological spirituality. That is what I would call it. So here is the rundown. The celestial equator passes very near Mintaka, which is one of the 3 stars in the belt of Orion, terrestrially corresponding to Oribe, which is critically fascinating. Oribe is one of the oldest inhabitants in all of America. While the ecliptic always passes through Gemini, just above the right hand of Orion, and between the horns of Taurus the Bull, the constellation next to Orion. The point at which the celestial equator presently crosses the ecliptic is located between Pisces and Aquarius. So we are entering the celebrated age of Aquarius. However, 6,500 years ago, the fiducial point of the vernal equinox was located between Gemini and Taurus, above Orion's raised weapon, and the Milky Way was passing directly through it. And I've got a picture. It's hard to see how to understand this, but there's the sky chart showing the different, the ecliptic in relation to the equator. And the reason that is so important is because of a concept that all the ancient high civilizations, you could call them, I don't know what else to call them, understood. For the Anasazi, this date, archaeologically speaking, places it squarely in the middle of the Archaic period. For the Hopi, this would correspond to the First World. So the pristine era just before the cosmogony, before our current universe was created, they lived in the First World. This particular astronomical situation was 6,500 years ago. It's very interesting that for classical writers, this same era was considered to be the Golden Age. The early 5th century AD Latin grammarian and philosopher Macrobius states that during this age, 6,500 BC, souls ascended through the gate of Capricorn and descended to be reborn through the gate of Cancer in the sky, in the Milky Way. The souls come from the stars. Because of the precession of the equinoxes caused by the slight wobble of the Earth's axis, the former gate is now currently located between Scorpius and Sagittarius. It's been moving through the precession, so the gate has changed. If you have not kept up with the rituals of cosmology, when we die, our souls won't know where to go. We will be lost. That is what makes the rituals and the spirituality and the stories of the deities in the sky, etc., which were normally the constellations. That's why those were so vital to the ancient cultures, because it gave them their bearings on the universe. That is what their temples were there for. Their temples were aligned with the equinoxes and the solstices so that it could give you a celestial compass on where you would go. That's very vital to the ancient cultures. We've lost all this fantastically interesting knowledge in our world. So the gateway between Scorpio and Sagittarius on one end of the Milky Way is the southern Stargate near the galactic center, because when you go to Sagittarius, you are pointing toward the center of our galaxy, the galactic core, the galactic center. That's where you need to go. So the latter gate, the one where the souls come through in order to be born on Earth, that gate is found between Taurus and Gemini on the opposite end. That's the northern Stargate near the galactic anti-center. Because of the precession, You point toward the center on this end of the Milky Way through Sagittarius, but the other one is on the other side out toward the edge of the galaxy. Those souls is where they come from to be born. So in terms of a star petroglyph that they found a forked icon that represents Taurus. This is very similar to the Chinese gate of heaven. The Chinese had this concept too. So did the Indians, according to Kumaraswamy. This gate of heaven is located terrestrially to the Hopis in the Grand Canyon. Very beautiful interest, because the valleys, the canyons, represent the depths. They are the gateways to the underworld. Right? So the Grand Canyon is a beautiful symbol that is a literal, physical symbol that they do climb down in for their rituals as well. It's a heck of a hike, I've been told. So this is all fascinating how it ties in, right? So it is an important pathway for the Kachinas, or the spirits, in their afterlife journey. So in 4500 BC, the place where the celestial equator crosses the ecliptic was at the heart of the galactic plane. This Stargate, so to speak, functioned as an interdimensional portal through which souls could pass into this earth life. And that is so fascinating that they also had this gate of heaven concept, and Orion was one of the main deities that helped guide the souls with his faithful dog to the gates. But you had to know Orion for the Hopi, Masau. And their ceremonies kept them in spiritual connection with Masau. I mean, there's just so much fabulous information of that kind of caliber in this video. I love this kind of stuff. I can't help it. I love this kind of stuff. The ancient mythology, the spirituality, the cosmology, and I mean, it's in the Egyptians. There's no question. It's in the Egyptians. It's in the Mesoamericans. It's in the Hopi. It is absolutely, definitely in the Greeks, as well as the Africans, the Dogon tribe, etc. It is absolutely everywhere. These are the two books. Now, Harold Corlander, he's the other one, The Fourth World of the Hopis, talking all about this time. And then Frank Waters, The Book of the Hopi. These are somewhat controversial with some of the Hopis, but that doesn't mean their information is bad. It just means that they're not agreed upon, which is typical. And then we have the same information. Kumaraswamy, Ananda K. Kumaraswamy, The Door in the Sky, on myth and meaning. This is a tremendously inspiring read as far as I'm concerned. Fantastic stuff. Demonstrating to us that it doesn't matter which side of the ocean you're on. It really doesn't matter which landmass you're in. All of the ancients had the sky. In fact, I do have a study. I haven't been able to find it for the last couple of weeks. I'm trying to keep my eyes peeled, where there is a husband-wife team who actually got together and they demonstrated without question that the Homeric epics, the Odyssey and the Iliad, are the mythological stories of the sky as star charts to help the sailors get to where they needed to go. That's fabulous. If I remember correctly, Achilles was Orion. Yeah. So anyway, I'll see if I can find that. But literally, it doesn't matter which culture you get to almost. There is always this tie-in with Orion, Sirius, with the cosmos heaven, the Middle Earth. The Middle Earth, yes, Tolkien pun intended, What was Tolkien trying to tell us in his story? Because all of mythology anciently was taught in story form, but it was true. We today, in our secular thinking, have completely misunderstood myth. We say, oh, that's just a myth, as if that's a false story from the truth. That's entirely wrong-headed. Myths were the stories describing the truth and reality. And that is so fascinating. It tied in the sky with the earth, the Middle Earth, and the underworld. Our cosmological journey as living beings, coming from the stars here to earth, going in the underworld, and going back to the stars. The ancient star religion. Raymond Faulkner, one of the great Egyptologists, had an article, and I tried to look for it, The Star Religion of Ancient Egypt, where every pharaoh originally in the earlier periods became a star after his death. That was later democratized in ancient Egypt, so that through the course of the pyramid texts, then you have the coffin texts, and I've got my copies right here, and then the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and I've got those over there. By the time of the Book of the Dead and the Book of Breathings, it had been democratized so that all of the people of ancient Egypt would become eternal like the stars. And so this is really interesting. Quite a fascinating cosmological spirituality, and it has to do with this subject of these visitors whom we identify as UAPs or UFOs, etc. And in every instance, the beings were here to help. They gave humanity agriculture, laws in which to live together peacefully, and mathematics and science and philosophy to improve our lot here on the earth. In every ancient culture, these sky beings were the helpers. Wait till I get to the watchers in the Old Testament in this book and describe the watchers and the Nephilim. You won't believe it. It's fun stuff. I don't have time this time. But anyway, so that's a quick rundown of Gary David's book, truly worth buying. It's well priced, superbly illustrated, absolutely fantastically told. This book had everything. I loved it. So I will be back with more as I have time. Thank you for watching the Backyard Professor Responds videos. Kind of a book review today, but a historical, spiritual, cosmological type of theological approach from an absolutely astonishing, very old culture, the Hopis and the Anasazi, who are, the Anasazi have died off, or else they moved back to Mesoamerica, but the Hopis still exist on those mesas in Arizona. Someday I'd like to go visit them, if they'll have me. I can't blame them if they don't, though, because we have done so bad with their culture. We've shown no respect, so we probably don't deserve these spiritual insights. So, and I'm deeply sorry that we had to treat other cultures like that, but what's done is done. Hopefully we can repair it a little bit. So I honor whom I will call, in the spirit of complete reverence, my Hopi brothers, if any of you are watching. I'm just trying to share the astonishing and incredibly uplifting, soul purifying and expanding cosmological spirituality that you people possess. I am in holy envy, and I am striving to learn about that as much as I can. So thanks for watching. I will be back as I can. Have a great day, you guys.